On July 1st, 2002, 46 Russian school children missed their flight when their bus driver took them to wrong airport. These children were on a school trip organized by the local UNESCO committee to the Costa Dorada beach. However, a charter flight was arranged for children, and this flight was BTC 2937. The airplane arranged was Tupolev Tu-154 passenger jet, or 3-engined, medium-range, narrow-body airliner designed in the mid-1960s and manufactured by Tupolev. The flight 2937 departed from Moscow at 18:48 hours for Barcelona International Airport. On the other side, a cargo jet of DHL International Aviation, with cargo from Bahrain, with stopover at Orio al Rio Airport, took off for Brussels Airport. This plane was Boeing 757 cargo jet. Cargo jet left Rio Airport in Bergamo at 21:06 hours. This plane was piloted by 47-year-old British Captain Paul Phillips and 34-year-old Canadian First Officer Brent Campioni. Both of pilots are experienced, Captain with 12,000 flying hours, and First Officer with 6,600. The Tupolev passenger jet was piloted by 52-year-old Captain Alexander Mikhailovich Gross and 40-year-old First Officer Oleg Pavlovich Grigoriev. Captain Gross was experienced with more than 12,000 flight hours and First Officer with 8,500. Beside them, 2 experienced crew members also joined the cockpit, but as a test pilot. Because this was Captain's assessment flight, collision happened when both flight entered Swiss airspace that was controlled by private Swiss company SkyGuide. At the time of accident, air traffic controller Peter Nielsen was on duty and only controller handling the airspace. He was working on 2 workstations at the same time, and this was against the government and SkyGuide regulations. At around 21:20 hours, DHL flight reported to the area control center responsible for southern German airspace. Nielsen then instructed flight to climb from flight level 260 to flight level 320, but DHL flight requested permission to continue to flight level 260 to save fuel, and the permission was granted by Nielsen, after which flight 611 reached the desired altitude at 23:29 hours. Meanwhile, flight 2937 contacted Nielsen at 23:30 hours at flight level 260, who acknowledged the flight. However, he did not assign a different altitude to either flight 611 or flight 2937, meaning that both aircraft were now at the same altitude and on a collision course. Less than a minute before the crash, Nielsen realized the danger and contacted flight 2937, and he instructed the pilot to descend to flight level 250 to avoid collision with crossing traffic, which was the flight 611. Seconds after the crew of flight 2937 initiated the descent, their traffic collision avoidance system instructed them to climb, while at about the same time the TCAS on flight 611 instructed the crew of that aircraft to descend. DHL flight pilots followed the TCAS instructions and initiated a descent, but could not immediately inform Nielsen because the controller was dealing with flight 2937. About 8 seconds before the collision, flight 611's descent rate was about 12 meter per second. That was not rapid as the 15 meter per second is advised by the TCAS. While the crew of flight 2937 disregarded their TCAS instruction to climb, having already commenced a descent as instructed by the controller. And now, both planes were descending. Unaware of the TCAS issued alerts, Nielsen repeated his instruction to flight 2937 to descend, giving the crew incorrect information as to the position of the DHL plane. 8 seconds before the collision, flight 2937's crew finally realized their actual position when they gained visual sight of flight 611 incoming from the left. Flight 611, in response, increased its descent rate. 2 seconds before the collision, flight 2937's pilots finally obeyed the jet's TCAS instruction to climb and attempted to put the aircraft into a climb, but by then, the collision was inevitable. The 2 aircraft collided at 21:35 hours. at almost a right angle at an altitude of 10,630 meters, with Flight 611's vertical stabilizer slicing completely through Flight 2937's fuselage just ahead of the wings. Flight 2937 broke into several pieces, scattering wreckage over a wide area. The nose section of the aircraft fell vertically, while the tail section with the engines continued, stalled, and fell. And all 69 people on board Flight 2937 and both crew members on board Flight 611 died. Beside pilot and ATC errors, many factors were considered that could avert accident. The ground-based optical collision warning system was found switched off for maintenance, and an oral short-term conflict alert warning was not heard by anyone present at that time. Although no error in this system could be found in a subsequent technical audit. However, whether or not this audible warning is functional is not something that is technically logged. Even if Nielsen had heard this warning, at that time finding a useful resolution order by the ATC was impossible. The accident raised questions as to how pilots must react when they receive conflicting orders from TCAS and ATC. TCAS was a relatively new technology at the time of the accident, having been mandatory. Investigations were carried out and found that mid-air collision caused by ATC error, compounded by ambiguity and traffic collision avoidance system operation. But this accident could be averted because, about 17 months before collision, another incident had occurred involving confusion between conflicting TCAS and ATC commands. In 2001, two Japanese airliners nearly collided with each other in Japanese airspace. One of the aircraft had received conflicting orders from TCAS and ATC. One pilot followed the instructions of TCAS, while the other did not. A collision was only averted because one of the pilots made evasive maneuvers based on a visual judgment. The aircraft missed each other by about 135 meters, and the abrupt maneuver necessary to avert disaster left 100 occupants injured on one aircraft, some seriously. In its report, published 11 days after the Überlingen accident, Japan called on the International Civil Aviation Organization to make it clear that TCAS advisory should always take precedence over ATC instructions. ICAO accepted this recommendation and amended its regulations in November 2003. In our analysis, this accident could have been avoided if decisions were taken at the time of the Japanese airline incident.